Without Ratan Tata, it is almost certain that Tata Group would not be where it is today on the global business map. 500,000 employees worldwide, 100 operating companies, 36 of which are publicly listed, spread across 56 countries in 6 continents. More than 65% of the group's income today comes from overseas operations. Ratan Tata is a shy person, he says. He enjoys swimming and at one point was an avid and regular scuba diver. Cars and planes are his biggest and perhaps only indulgences. He is an accomplished pilot and flies both planes and helicopters. He serves on the program board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's India AIDS Initiative. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Southern California and the Harvard Business School Board of Dean's Advisors, the X Prize, and Cornell University. Perhaps one day, a small and humble business school in France could be added to that very exclusive list of where he chooses to make his mark. On legacy, he has said, apart from values and ethics, which I have tried to live by, the legacy that I would like to leave behind is a very simple one, that I have always stood up for what I consider to be the right thing, and I have tried to be as fair and equitable as I could be. We are honored to have you here with us tonight, Mr. Tata, and on behalf of the HEC Paris community, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome. Many in our audience might have been surprised to hear that when you returned to India as a young man, you started on the shop floor at Tata Steel. I wondered if you could share with us a few lessons that you learned at that time.
I was on the shop floor for about 2 or 3 years. And during those 2 or 3 years, I thought this was an absolute waste of time and it served absolutely no purpose. I was very wrong because I learned a lot in those 3 years. Perhaps what I learned best was the question of humility amongst people, because standing shoulder to shoulder with workers for 3 years and being given no special privileges, I learned what the other larger segment of our workforce did, like how they reacted, and very emotionally, when I became chairman of Tata Steel in '91, several of the workers came up to me and said, "Do you remember I was in the blast furnace with you, or I taught you how to read temperatures or whatever?" And not many chairmen have that privilege of being friendly with someone who you could call by their first name, or they could call you by their first name. So I learned a lot. And sorry, long answer to your question.
Not at all. Thank you.
So here at HEC Paris, we have a lot of emphasis on leadership, and it is also evident in the fact that we produce a large number of CEOs. So do you believe the leaders are born, or can leadership be taught in classrooms?
That's a difficult question to answer, because I don't think there's a one answer to that. I think both things of what you said are true. That there's some people who are born leaders and some who shine as leaders because a circumstance or a predicament takes place, and someone who's shy and almost retiring, suddenly begins to shine and takes on leadership positions. So I don't think there's a single answer to that.
Thank you.
You've said before, if I can just turn a little bit to decision making for a second, you've said before that I don't believe in taking right decisions. I take decisions, then I make them right. How did you come to build that philosophy?
I'm sorry, I'm going to upset you, but Facebook or Twitter that made that statement, it was never made by me.
That's not you. Well, that's awkward.
And so it's been a default statement. You come to know of it when people read them back to you. Mm-hmm. And there's no remedial action that you can take with the social media.
True.
And so you live with it. Some people think it's arrogant for you to have stated that, and you don't have a chance to defend yourself by saying you never did. And some people think it's a great thing to say, and you quietly keep quiet. So
maybe instead, then, what I could ask is generally speaking, maybe a very important decision that you had to make throughout your long and tenured career that you can share with us, and maybe more generally your decision-making philosophy then. And we'll have a new Twitter quote.
I'll try not to make this as long an answer as the first time. Maybe two instances stand out in my mind as being instances that had a bearing on being right or wrong, as the case might be. The first that comes to mind is we developed, as you know, a small car called the Nano. We decided that we would establish the factory in Calcutta because industry had moved away from the eastern part of India, and we thought a revolutionary car could be in a place that brought employment back to eastern India. We unfortunately got embroiled in a political battle between the government of West Bengal and an aspiring political leader, a lady, who vowed that she would not allow a single car to come out of this factory. And the war of words went on between her and me. The factory was almost 85% complete, and I had to take a decision that, given the fact that we had dead bodies thrown on the site, we had shootings, we had people beaten up, that I couldn't look at our employees in their eye and say that you'll work in this factory. So I decided that we would move. And we decided that in the dead of night, and we started moving a completed car plant over the next several days. I think with about 1,400 large tractor-trailer trucks, we moved the plant out and ended up in Gujarat, which is Mr. Modi's state. We lost a lot in that period of 1 year where we rebuilt that plant. To this day, one will never know whether we did the right thing or not. I personally believe that that was the only option we had, but it became a very ugly decision that had to be taken. The second, if you might, challenge that I faced, completely different, was when 10 Pakistani terrorists descended on Bombay and and amongst the places they attacked our hotel. And about 37 or 40 people in our hotel were shot and killed for no reason. And then it became an issue that do you stand by and let this happen, or do you go into the midst of what was like a war zone and stand with your employees and go to the homes of people who were killed, and I chose to do the latter, to go every day to the hospitals to look at the people who were injured. And there again, that leaves a lasting impression on you in terms of what happened, what could have been done to avoid it, and how could you deal with this? What was the best form of support you could give to your people? I think those two instances stand out as being challenging moments in one's career.
And certainly not easy.
In terms of Europe, we see that Tata Group has a lot of investments in Europe, and it's a big player for the Tata Group portfolio. How do you see Europe's future business potential?
Well, I've always felt that Europe is a union of nations that has a tremendous potential. It's a huge market. It's also a union of countries that is going through a difficult economic period of time at this point in time, partly because of common currency and partly because each of the countries are not of the same economic status. I can only say that I hope that the European Union is able to come out of this and revert back to the prosperity that the founding fathers of the EU had hoped, and that it takes its place in the world as an important economic power.
Thank you.
Just to maybe bounce off of that question, a key strategy over the past decade for the group has been inorganic growth through acquisitions. A key strategy over the past decade for the group has been through acquisitions. What prompted this specific strategy? And I'm thinking of a couple of particular brands overseas, both Tetley and Jaguar Land Rover.
Tetley, I think, was motivated by the fact that we had the second largest tea garden and tea activity in India, and Tetley was an opportunity to get an international brand. The two other major acquisitions, Jaguar Land Rover and Chorus, in each case, the companies came to us and asked whether we couldn't get together. And on looking at them, we felt that they fulfilled important strategic gaps that we had in either the geography we operated in or the product areas or technology that we had, which made us go forward. It was not, contrary to most people's view, an issue of just getting bigger.
Do you think that that's a strategy that's sustainable for the future of Tata Group, as far as acquisitions?
Well, I think there was a strategy in each of the acquisitions. It wasn't just a shopping spree, as some of the media has referred to it. And I think the only one that has gone through a great deal of difficulty has been Chorus, which has been as much an issue of the economic situation in Europe as as much as one could blame the concerned company that we acquired, it's the steel industry in Europe itself has been going through a very difficult period, and we have been hit by that rather badly. As I said, I hope Europe recovers, and in that case, one would find that it would be an investment that was strategic in value.
That segues actually very nicely into my next question. It's about Jaguar Land Rover and JLR being a household brand in the UK and a very common name in Great Britain. So when you acquired that, when Tata Group acquired, how do you deal with it in terms of culture, especially integrating that into your portfolio?
First of all, there was a great deal of misunderstanding in the UK. There were and this permeated into the workforce also. There was a feeling that this was a ploy for an Indian company to buy Jaguar Land Rover, close down the plants in England, move the factories to India, and make Birmingham into a real estate project or a set of, I'm saying this not facetiously because it was said to me, of tandoori chicken restaurants in the Midlands. And I had to stand in front of the workers and assure them that A, Tatas were not in the restaurant business, that we may have some hotels, but we didn't have a chain of restaurants, and that was not our intention. It was also not our intention to saddle JLR with cheap cars from India. And then what we said, which is what we tried to do, was to say our plan is to leave you alone, to support you, and work with you in returning these two brands to their original glory. What's gratifying is that the workforce in JLR did exactly that. They with pride, worked towards making the car company closer to what it was in the days of its heyday. And I think they've done admirably well, and the management of JLR, I think, are really the heroes of the day.
Thank you.
So certainly during your time, you saw a lot of change and ushered in a lot of change at the Tata Group. We know that it's a company steeped in history. It has certain ways of working. If you can take us back a little bit to that moment when you became chairman, how hard was it for you to create a culture of positive change?
My first few years as chairman was committed and dedicated to changing the culture in the company. I inherited a board, for example, that must have have an average age of 85. We had a few directors who were participating. Several of them had to be helped into the boardroom because they could no longer walk freely. Some of them came and sat down and fell asleep. Others didn't hear too well. But when it came to making changes, they all woke up and ensured that no change took place. So the first 4 or 5 years were spent in trying to figure out how to graciously ease them out of the company. And finally, I'm pleased to say that most of them followed a trend of, if you made them an offer that was attractive enough, they agreed to move. And then 5 years later, one could sit down and try to create a new culture, a company that, a group that was more customer-oriented and attempted to be more nimble-footed than it had been in the past.
So, Mr. Tata, my next question is about that time in your life when you became the chairman of the Tata Group. You said something that stands out even today, that you felt all alone at the top.
Sorry?
That you felt all alone when you were the chairman of the Tata Group. And the fact that most of us will probably be leaders in the future, what can we expect?
Oh, I think there are many moments that most CEOs or chairmen feel that they're alone. It's almost an occupational hazard that you live with, where you either can't confide because it's not appropriate, or you stand alone against a tide of views or pushes where you don't feel that you need to be compromised. There was a time when one felt that the fabric of India, and the ethical fabric of India, was being eroded. And most companies, including ours, had to face an issue of dealing with this by participating in subjective activities, be they doing favors for people or actually paying. And the few times that we were approached and stood our ground and did not do that made me go home at night with this wonderful feeling that we didn't succumb. And anybody that says that you can't operate in India without paying, I think needs to look at us as an example, because we grew, and we grew from about 5 billion to 100 billion without participating in anything subjective. So industry can grow in India, and you don't need to succumb. And I think that's the one thing I would say that was probably the loneliest moment or set of moments that one has, and one feels pleased that you were able to go through that period and not compromise your ideals.
Thank you, Mr. Tata. I think that is a very clear embodiment. I think that's a very clear embodiment of the Tata way of doing business.
Sorry?
I think that's a very clear embodiment of the Tata way of doing business.
As an organization gets larger, the institution sometimes becomes more important than the inspiration. In the 21st century, what role do you think leaders play in keeping that inspiration alive at large companies? Just generally speaking, leaders in the 21st century, how can they keep that inspiration alive? How did you maybe help to keep that inspiration alive at Tata Group?
How do they
keep inspiration when a company becomes so big?
I think it's a greater challenge as the company grows bigger, but you understand that everybody in a large organization gets further and further from getting the feeling that they're adding value, and they feel that they're little ants in an anthill. So it becomes the job of the CEO to inspire the people and communicate with them and deal with them in a manner that they understand. How well you do it or how poorly you do it, you find out after the event. So I think all large organizations that are successful have CEOs that go out of their way to communicate with their employees, because the greatest asset they have are their employees. And dissatisfied employees or ignored employees are unhappy employees, and they don't give you the best. So I think most successful CEOs give a lot of their attention and time to doing this, and to paying particular attention to the needs of their employees. So, and we tried to do the same.
Of course.
So, Mr. Tata, talking of inspiration, I'm sure you're a great inspiration to a lot of us here, and personally for me as well. So, if I can ask, was there someone who inspired you when you were growing up as a young boy in India?
Yes. I think Mr. Ratan Tata, who was my predecessor, played a very important role in being a mentor to me. The day he handed over to me, which is a little bit surprising, I was terrified because he was staying on in the office, and I thought he would continue to run the group from where he was. I was truly terrified. I thought this was going to be a hypocritical handover. What it actually turned out to be was he gave me most of my inspiration, most of the support I needed in those early days. Most of the advice that I received came from him. And I don't know what would have happened in those first 2 or 3 years while he was there, had he not been there. So, yes, he was probably my greatest inspiration and greatest role model that I had, and I was very lucky to have him.
Thank you.
This is like Wimbledon.
It does feel that way, a little bit. Thank you for playing along, by the way. Maybe I'd like to include then the audience in this back and forth a little bit more by talking about advice that you might give to young graduates. And I'm thinking specifically on balancing humility with the desire to be proud and bold.
I think both those attributes are important. I don't think you can make them up or act that without having those feelings within you, those emotions within you. And I don't think you can teach that or you can force that to happen. I think it depends on each person. Many of the people in this room who are students today would find themselves in leadership positions in the near future, and they have to define their own styles in as natural a way as they can. But they need humility, because without that, it's very difficult to, in today's world, to be a good autocratic or dictatorial leader. And it's much more expected that you would be a humble, communicative leader to lead your organization and your employees in a particular way. So all I can say is that this is to be an attribute that comes from within the people that are going to go out into industry, and I hope the education that they receive here will give them both humility and a sense of innovativeness, and some balance of both things. Your serve.
Your serve.
My serve. So, in the last 20 years, you've seen India grow a lot, and there's been constant growth in the last 20 years when you were chairman of the Tata Group. How confident are you about the prospects of India in the business potential today and in the future?
How,
Confident, and how do you see India's future in terms of business?
economically or politically?
Economically.
Well, let me just say that I've always been very upbeat about the prospects and potential of India. We're a country of over 1 billion people, getting to be larger in terms of the consuming segment. Roughly 250 to 300 million people who are consumers, about the size of the United States. And the segment that's becoming prosperous is growing every year from below. We have a new government, as everyone knows, a very active prime minister who is convinced that he can give India the impetus and the momentum that it needs to take its place amongst the economic countries in the world. And I think he has been energetically going about repairing the relations with India's neighbors. He has been giving hope and aspirations to millions of Indians. And we're all very hopeful that this is going to work out to be a new India which is emerging. Some words of caution are that the aspirations of everyone in India are very high, and maybe sometimes unrealistically high, because a country of 1 billion people is very difficult to change overnight. And there could be levels of disillusionment amongst the people, which I think those of us who could be opinion makers should urge the people of India to stand with the new government and help make India the country that it could be. But it very realistically may fall short of them, despite everybody's best endeavors, because of its size, because of its traditions, and because of its greatest enemy, which is vested interests that seem to govern in India at any one time.
So just to follow up on that, what do you think is the role of the government in keeping growth constant and keeping it going?
Sorry?
What is the role of the government in encouraging or creating a positive business climate in India?
Well, I think if I could quote Mr. Modi, he has talked about more governance and less government. We have been overgoverned and overruled and overmanaged politically. And I think it would be a wonderful thing in India if we were to open up India even more than it was and let free market forces apply, and let government simplify its governmental role, and the role of government be more supportive than regulatory, which I think Mr. Modi is committed to do.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over then just to
Sorry to make you.
Not at all, not at all. You're now retired, and yet, as we mentioned in our intro, you're still very active, both in India and abroad. Can you share with us how you plan to fill that luxury of time in the coming years that you have?
That much time to...
How do you plan to fill your time in the coming years? If you can share a little bit with us.
Well, I expected and planned to spend my time, and I have been doing that by and large, to combat malnutrition in children and mothers in India in the rural areas. We lose a disproportionately high number of infants due to malnutrition, and they have physical and mental deformities due to malnutrition. And the view I had was that this was an area that one could make a difference. It's proven to be a much bigger issue. It involves areas that I had not expected, namely sanitation and health and such, which holistically have to be examined and dealt with. So one of the main areas of my time is being spent in trying to address this and bring technology to play. I'm working with other philanthropic institutions like the Gates Foundation and some of the UN agencies to make this happen. And there are a lot of other little things that one is doing, but I'm certainly not idle, and I'm very pleased that I'm still busy.
Of course, thank you.
That's it, Mr. Ratan Tata. So that's the end of the match, and I'd like to say...
I think now we wanted to open it up to some audience questions,
Okay.
of course.
Thank you, Mr. Tata.